It is the summer of 1940. The last of the British Expeditionary Force has staggered back from the beaches of Dunkirk, sunburned, exhausted, and largely weaponless. In the lanes of southern England, a retired schoolmaster named Arthur Pickering stands behind a hawthorn hedge with a single Lee Enfield rifle and 3 rounds of ammunition. He is 47 years old. He is the last line of defence between the German army and London. And somewhere in his garden shed, wrapped in an old newspaper, sits a milk bottle. Not a bottle of milk, precisely. The liquid inside is a pale yellowish solution that smells faintly of petrol. It has been sealed with a wax stopper and a rubber band. The label on the neck reads, in careful penciled letters, "Do not store near heat." Arthur Pickering does not know exactly what is inside. He has been told at a village hall meeting attended by a retired colonel and a man from the ministry who never gave his name, only that he should throw it at anything with a swastika and then run. What Arthur Pickering holds in his shed is the No. 76 Special Incendiary Grenade, a weapon so improvised, so low-tech, and so spectacularly effective that it would go on to disable more enemy vehicles, tanks and armoured cars in the theatres of the Second World War than virtually any dedicated British anti-armour weapon of the period. It was made from a standard glass milk bottle. It was filled with white phosphorus, dissolved in a solution of benzene. It ignited on contact with air, and it was, by almost every measurable standard, an accident of brilliant desperation. This is the story of how Britain, stripped of its army and its conventional weapons, armed 250,000 volunteers with repurposed dairy containers and accidentally invented one of the most effective anti-armour incendiary devices the world had ever seen. To understand why the No. 76 existed at all, you need to understand just how completely the British Army had been stripped bare at Dunkirk. Between 26th May and 4th June 1940, the Royal Navy and a flotilla of civilian vessels rescued approximately 338,000 men from the beaches of northern France. They left behind on the sand and in the surf, and in the burning lanes around Calais, almost everything else. Estimates suggest that the British Army abandoned roughly 64,000 motor vehicles, 20,548 motorcycles, 2,472 artillery pieces, and 84,427 horses. They left 657 tanks. They left nearly 500,000 tons of stores and ammunition. The men came home with their lives and, in most cases, their rifles. That was largely it. Into this void stepped the Home Guard, an organisation that must rank among the most magnificently improvised military forces in modern history. Formed on the 14th of May 1940, just days before the Dunkirk evacuation even began, it eventually swelled to over 1.5 million men, farmers, teachers, dockworkers and clergymen, tasked with defending the British Isles against the possibility of German invasion. The problem was that nobody had any weapons to give them. The standard anti-tank grenade of the period, the No. 74 sticky bomb, a glass sphere coated in adhesive compound and surrounded by a sheet metal casing, was fiddly, unreliable, and in genuinely short supply. The Molotov cocktail, adopted from Finnish resistance fighters who had used it against Soviet tanks during the Winter War, was effective but required a burning wick, a steady hand, and the kind of timing that tends to desert a person when an actual tank is bearing down on them at 30 kilometers an hour. Something new was needed. Something simple, reliable, and manufacturable at scale, with whatever Britain actually had on hand. The answer, when it came, was so obvious that it is slightly astonishing nobody thought of it sooner, and it arrived through a particular branch of British science that, in 1940, was operating at a level of barely restrained genius. The Special Operations Executive, the SOE, Churchill's famous directive to set Europe ablaze, maintained a number of research stations developing weapons of varying legality and plausibility. One of the most productive was Station 9, housed in a Victorian country house called the Frythe, near Welwyn in Hertfordshire. Here, a team of chemists, engineers, and specialists in what might charitably be called unconventional warfare worked on problems that the conventional military either could not or would not address. The key ingredient in what would become the No. 76 was white phosphorus, a substance that has been used in military applications since the First World War. White phosphorus is a waxy, yellowish solid that ignites spontaneously when exposed to oxygen. It burns at approximately 816 degrees Celsius, roughly equivalent to the surface temperature of a low-pressure sodium lamp, and continues to burn so long as oxygen is present. It cannot be extinguished with water. It sticks to surfaces. It generates a thick, choking white smoke as a byproduct of combustion. It is, in short, everything you would want in an incendiary weapon. The challenge had always been delivery. White phosphorus in its raw form is extraordinarily dangerous to handle and transport. The breakthrough at the Fryth, and it was a genuine breakthrough for all its apparent simplicity, was to dissolve the phosphorus in a solution of benzene and water, creating a stable liquid that could be sealed in a standard glass container. In this dissolved state, the phosphorus remained inert. The moment the glass broke and the solution was exposed to air, the benzene began to evaporate and the phosphorus ignited. The container chosen was a standard British half-pint milk bottle, not because it was symbolic, or ironic, or particularly suited to the task. It was chosen because Britain had several billion of them, a well-established distribution network, and factories already set up to wash, fill, and cap them at industrial speed. Each bottle was filled with roughly 285 millilitres of the phosphorus benzene solution. The neck was sealed with a black rubber stopper, the same stopper used in standard pharmaceutical bottles, and dipped in wax to create an airtight seal. The whole assembly weighed approximately 600 grams, which is roughly the same as a full can of baked beans. The total manufacturing cost at 1940 prices was approximately fourpence per unit. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 5 and 6 million number 76 grenades were manufactured during the war, though exact production records remain incomplete. They were produced not in a single facility, but distributed across factories, workshops, and even some school chemistry laboratories, repurposed for the duration. The bottles were packed in sawdust in wooden crates of 12, transported by lorry to Home Guard depots, and issued to units across the country. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The weapon was simple to use in principle. The thrower aimed for the engine compartment, the air intake, or the vision slits of an armoured vehicle. The bottle broke on impact. The solution spread across the surface, and within 1 to 2 seconds, the phosphorus ignited, sending a sheet of unquenchable, penetrating flame across the target. The smoke generated was dense enough to blind tank crews, forcing them to open hatches, at which point they became vulnerable to other weapons. The burning liquid had a particular affinity for rubber seals, engine gaskets, and the wiring looms that ran along the inside of armoured vehicle bodies. Even a small amount entering an engine intake was sufficient to seize an engine entirely. The number 76 saw operational use across multiple theatres, though the documentary record is, as with much Home Guard material, patchy and frequently classified long after the fact. In the North African desert, partisans and irregular forces supplied with British equipment used phosphorus grenades against Italian and German armoured columns with, by contemporary accounts, considerable effect. In Greece and Yugoslavia, resistance fighters supplied by SOE drops used number 76 against German motorised transport, with results that surviving German after-action reports described, in one case, as incendiarist attacks of considerable sophistication. On the home front, training exercises conducted in 1941 and 1942 with decommissioned armoured vehicles demonstrated that a single bottle, striking the engine deck of a Panzer III or similar tank, was capable of starting a fire that, if not immediately suppressed, would disable the vehicle entirely within 4 to 6 minutes. The psychological effect on tank crews was considerable. Armoured vehicles, which ordinarily instill a sense of near invulnerability in their operators, suddenly became potential ovens. The smell of burning phosphorus, sharp, acidic and penetrating, became associated in the minds of German tankers with the specific horror of being caught inside a burning steel box. Records of individual engagements are sparse. Resistance fighters did not, as a rule, file detailed after-action reports. What survives tends to be anecdotal, accounts in memoirs, intelligence summaries, and post-war testimonies. What can be said with confidence is that number 76 production was expanded twice during the war, suggesting that demand from the field outpaced initial supply projections. The German equivalent of the improvised incendiary grenade was the Brandflash, literally fire bottle, which was used in various forms by German forces throughout the war, largely as a weapon of last resort. The German version typically used a petroleum distillate, most commonly petrol or a mixture of petrol and oil, with a conventional wick ignition system. It was effective against unarmoured vehicles and soft targets, but required the thrower to light the wick before throwing, introducing a delay that, in combat conditions, could prove fatal. It also required the thrower to have a source of ignition at hand, which sounds straightforward until you consider throwing something with one hand while holding a lit match in the other, with a tank approximately 15 metres away. The American military experimented extensively with napalm-based incendiaries throughout the war, eventually settling on the M1A1 launcher, a flamethrower, as their primary incendiary anti-armour solution. The M1A1 was devastatingly effective, but required specialised training, weighed approximately 18 kilograms fully loaded, and was, not to put too fine a point on it, a device that required its operator to walk towards a tank while on fire. The number 76, by contrast, could be thrown from behind cover by a man with no military training whatsoever, from a distance of roughly 20 metres at a moving target, and still have a reasonable probability of disabling it. The Soviets developed the KS mixture, a carbon disulfide and phosphorus solution, as an anti-tank weapon during the Finnish War, and Soviet factory output of improvised incendiary grenades during the defence of Leningrad and Stalingrad ran into the millions. The principle was identical to the British number 76, though whether this represented genuine independent discovery or intelligence sharing through Allied channels remains, at least in the open historical record, unclear. What distinguished the British approach was the systematic organisation of production, distribution, and training. The Home Guard was issued pamphlets explaining exactly how to use the number 76, including diagrams of tank weak points and recommended throwing angles. This was not a weapon handed out with a vague suggestion to have a go. It was a weapon system, however humble its components. Assessing the number 76's actual historical impact is an exercise in honest uncertainty. The nature of the weapon, distributed in millions to irregular forces and civilian volunteers, used in scattered engagements across multiple theatres and never subjected to centralised record-keeping, makes precise accounting impossible. We cannot say with confidence that it disabled a specific number of vehicles, killed a specific number of enemy soldiers, or turned the course of any single battle. What we can say is this: in the context of 1940 Britain, the number 76 was a genuine strategic contribution. It gave the Home Guard something real with which to fight. A Panzer IV, encountering a hedgerow full of retired solicitors, armed with milk bottles full of phosphorus, faced a materially different proposition to one encountering the same hedgerow unarmed. The weapon was cheap, simple, practically impossible to exhaust and psychologically transformative. It meant that armoured invasion of the British mainland would not have been the swift, triumphant progress it had been in France. Every lane, every hedgerow, every village square was a potential kill zone. The cost-to-effect ratio of the number 76 has never been formally calculated, but it cannot be anything other than extraordinary. Approximately fourpence per grenade, against a vehicle that cost the Third Reich somewhere in the region of 100,000 Reichsmarks. Surviving examples of the number 76 can be seen at the Imperial War Museum in London and at several regional Home Guard collections, where they tend to sit in their original crates with their wax-sealed stoppers intact. They look to the modern eye precisely like what they are, milk bottles. Slightly disreputable, entirely unimpressive, and quite extraordinarily deadly. Return for a moment to Arthur Pickering behind his hawthorn hedge in the summer of 1940. He does not know that the war will last another 5 years. He does not know that the invasion he is preparing to resist will never come. He knows only that he is a retired schoolmaster with 3 rounds of ammunition, a hedge, and a milk bottle filled with something that glows faintly in the dark. Britain in 1940 had been stripped of almost everything it needed to fight a modern war. It had lost its tanks at Dunkirk. It had left its artillery in the mud of Flanders. It had sent its trained soldiers across the Channel and got most of them back, but without their equipment. What it retained, in its factories and its farms and its dairies and its chemistry laboratories, was ingenuity, the particular, pragmatic, slightly irritable British genius for looking at what is actually available and making something that actually works. The number 76 was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It was not the product of years of engineering refinement or vast military expenditure. It was white phosphorus in a milk bottle, sealed with a rubber stopper and dipped in wax by a woman in a repurposed factory in the English Midlands, packed into a crate, driven by lorry to a village hall, and handed to a retired schoolmaster with instructions to throw it at tanks. And it worked, against armoured vehicles that had rolled through Poland, Belgium, France and Norway, against engines designed in Berlin and manufactured in the Ruhr, against steel and rubber and glass and the wiring looms of the Wehrmacht's armoured divisions. A milk bottle full of chemistry, 6 million of them were made, an entire industrial programme, built on the infrastructure of the British dairy industry, an entire anti-armour doctrine, improvised in the space of a few desperate months and written up in a pamphlet that cost the government less than a shilling to print. The German General Staff spent years developing the doctrine of blitzkrieg, fast armour, supported by air, breaking through conventional defensive lines. Nobody in Berlin appears to have accounted for the possibility of encountering several 100,000 retired schoolmasters with dairy products. In the mathematics of the Second World War, very few weapons achieved a better ratio of cost to effect than the number 76, and none of them came in a bottle that was, until very recently, used to deliver semi-skimmed milk to the doorsteps of suburban England. Arthur Pickering never had to use his. The invasion never came. He returned the bottle to the depot in the autumn of 1941, when the immediate threat had passed, and went back to teaching history at the local grammar school. He had for a time been holding history in his hands,